the Paris Climate Conference, also known as COP21, is a conference that gets the international community together to address the issue of climate change, which is caused by the release of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. So basically there have been about 2 decades of such conferences, and the reason for this Paris conference is that there will be a need for some kind of global agreement to address the issue of climate change after 2020, which is when the second phase of the Kyoto period finishes for countries to get together and to work out a solution to address climate change. Well, several countries are. As part of the process for the Paris conference, it was asked of all countries to submit pledges that would detail what they plan to do in their climate and energy policies to address the issue of climate change. So far, about 160 countries have done so, and these pledges include policies of various strength and commitment and detail, but basically what they do is address the issue of emissions. They might have a target year to reduce their emissions that are getting released. They might have a peak year for emissions. They are pledging to reduce the carbon intensity of their economies. And some of these statements also include policy measures more specifically, such as renewable energy targets, energy efficiency measures, policies aimed at reducing emissions from the transport sector, addressing the issue of methane, and addressing the issue of emissions from the forestry sector as well. So not just the causes of emissions from energy consumption. So I think it's pretty important to recognise that several countries around the world are actually doing something. Whether it will be enough to get the desired agreement is yet to be determined yet, but there seems to be a shift generally in policy direction that recognises that there is a need to do something about climate change. Yes, well, emissions have been growing, of course, quite rapidly, but last year there was an interesting development in that it showed possibly an early sign of less of a relationship between economic growth and growth in emissions. There was global growth, according to the IEA, of about 3%, yet global emissions grew by about 0.5%. A lot of this was probably due to a shift in the situation in China, but also if you see in developed economies much less carbon intensive systems. However, with other developing economies, you still see strong growth in emissions as well. However, over the long term, you do see a transition, for example, in the power sector, where a lot of new capacity of global power additions are in low or zero carbon sources such as renewables or nuclear or so forth. So while emissions are still growing, that rate of growth may be slowing down. However, it may not be enough yet to get us to the desired outcome, which is to limit the global average temperature increase to 2 degrees. So we may be heading in the right direction, but there is still a long way to go.